Um, Hello, Nina Khrushcheva here, Senior Fellow at the Kreisky Forum for International Dialogue. Usually we talk about Russia when it's me, so we're going to talk about Russia with me. And my guest today, I've introduced so many wonderful journalists to the Kreisky Forum, but this is my distinct pleasure to speak to Shaun Walker, the long life reporter from The Guardian. He's been covering Moscow for over a decade, really one of the best reporters that we've had. He moved to Hungary now, which is closer to Vienna, but doesn't have, Mother Russia escape his interests. So we want to talk about his recent visit to Tomsk, the city in Siberia where Alexei Navalny got poisoned. So I'm very kind of curious to find out about the investigation. And you all may know Shaun from not only from The Guardian work, but also his great book that was published a few years ago called Putin's New Russia. And there he really, in a remarkably thoughtful and provocative manner, looks at how Putin has used history kind of to make Russia great again. I guess we can use this expression. Like that, yeah. Anyway, but let's just talk about Tomsk and the Navalny case first. As you know, Navalny, the most prominent opposition leader. And if you look at the Guardian site, Shaun really covered quite a bit of Navalny poisoning, which happened in Tomsk in August, at the end of August. But one of the articles that I thought was really interesting is that Navalny escaped death, but can he actually conquer Putin? Or what would be the outcome of this poisoning and the outcome for Putin, not just for Navalny as well. So I'd like to probably start with your maybe investigation in Tomsk, but then I kind of want to get to what they say, who's behind it. I mean, is there any kind of consensus? I mean, I know Navalny says that it's Putin behind it. I doubt that Putin is behind it. It just seems too simple, but the fact that everybody thinks that Putin is behind it is already an important story. So will Putin pay for that kind of perception?
So that's the first question.
That's the first question.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, who is behind it is at this point kind of a matter of guesswork. But to me, I feel like I'm normally on the side of sort of not thinking that everything is Putin. I have to say, in this case, it seems to me, if we're going to accept, which I don't think there's any reason not to, that the Germans haven't invented that Novichok was there, right, then that I think immediately we're down to a very small circle of people that could have organized this. You would think. And the idea that one of those people would do something that would have such an obvious effect, such an obvious international resonance, just 2 years after, Skripal situation, seems to me unlikely you take that on as a freelancer without kind of taking it upstairs and checking. It's a lot of stuff is very unclear about it. I mean, were we supposed to find out that it was Novichok, and so it's a sort of demonstrative thing, in which case sort of why were they therefore very reluctant to let him go? So does that be, perhaps they were waiting for it to get out of the system? So does that mean we weren't supposed to find out it was Novichok? And then if we weren't supposed to find out, would you not use something that was much easier and more reliable to kill somebody? So there's a lot to me that's very confusing about it. But I think if I was going to be putting money on, was this something that was at the very least given the sort of tacit nod of the head, or was this a freelance operation? I would think the former is more likely.
Interesting. because I would completely disagree with you on that. I would think that.
Why do you think that?
Well, because I just think that there are so many free actors in Russia. I mean, I think the idea that Putin might like that certainly would be behind somebody's thinking about this. But I mean, if that is best Putin can do with all the perception that we have about him, that he's just navigating all this heavy KGB machinery, and he's a savvy operative capable of bringing down democracies all over the world, that's a bad operation for that. So
well, that's a different question. I mean, I'm not sure that I would would sign up to the sort of Putin is the all-knowing kind of sinister mastermind of this stuff. I think, we see a lot of their operations do go wrong. I think, Skripal did not die either. That's another thing. I would be quite surprised if it happened without his sign off. I mean, in that case, you could theoretically imagine, because I imagine GRU has access to this. Right. He was a former GRU operative. You could see this being a sort of internal GRU thing, perhaps.
Or
with Navalny, I mean, there are free actors in Russia, and I think what you saw with Nemtsov getting shot in Moscow, this seems, the clues seem to lead very clearly to Chechnya, and it seems pretty likely that Kadyrov or someone around Kadyrov could take this on in a sort of please the boss kind of way. So in this case, I think there are some really big doubts about was Putin even had any idea? Was he maybe genuinely angry when it happened? In the Navalny case, I think Novichok, that's not Novichok in the middle of Siberia against somebody whose every move is being surveilled by the FSB, as we know. It's at the very least, it's not a sort of rogue actor. It's not three Chechens in a car kind of carrying something out. It's something a bit more professional than that, even if it actually didn't work in the end.
Well, I guess I'm just going to stay with my Navalny has many enemies. A lot of them are local. I would imagine that, in fact, it serves against Putin's interests. I think what matters to me so much, because, that's also Russia. You've been here for a long, long time. On the black market, you can get anything, Novichok Plus and other things, if you want to. And in some ways, it is this kind of fake idea of patriotism. We're going to please the boss, and he's going to protect us because his idea, he doesn't give up the good people that try to please him, even if he doesn't think that that's a useful operation. But I guess we'll just have to disagree, but I do understand why we always think that all roads lead to Putin, because he's just such a compelling, as I was told one time on MSNBC, he's such a compelling villain.
Yeah.
But I do want to sort of the giant question, go back to Tomsk. I mean, what you've discovered. I mean, we know that the bottles came from the hotel room saved by people working for Navalny, and that's how it was able to get to Germany. But what have you found out? What were you tracing those steps?
No. So actually, my sort of reason for going to Tomsk was a bit different. It's already 6 weeks since it happened. So it was less really about trying to kind of investigate the poisoning, and more. So I wanted to write a big piece about how, whether, to what extent does both the poisoning of Navalny and the events in Belarus, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit, how does that affect the Russian political scene, both in terms of the way people think, the way the Kremlin thinks, and so I sort of felt there were two options of places I could go. One was to go to Khabarovsk and look at these protests that have been going on all through the summer. 8 hours on a plane, middle of COVID. I decided it was a little bit too far to go, even though the protests were still going on there.
And let's just explain that the protests were against the firing of the governor Sergei Skripal, and they've been going on, they've been going on since July, I guess, right?
Yes. So before
Navalny, yeah. So they've been going on for a long time.
Yeah, but then I thought actually Tomsk was interesting as a place to go, obviously because of what happened to Navalny there, and then Ksenia Fadzeeva and Andrei Fateyev, who are the two sort of local Navalny acolytes in Tomsk, who they appear in the video that he made just before he was poisoned. And then on September the 13th, so 3 weeks after the poisoning, they had the municipal city Duma elections in Tomsk, and both of them managed to get onto the city Duma, which was quite interesting and quite unusual. I mean, it's not like the Tomsk city Duma is, this is the end of Putin because 2 people from Navalny have got onto it, but it seemed to me quite an interesting phenomenon that so previously there's 37 members of the Duma, and previously United Russia, the pro-Kremlin sort of behemoth party, had 32 of them, and after this vote they only have 11, and there's these 2 Navalny guys. So even though Navalny can't get his party registered, these 2 guys ran in sort of single mandate districts as independent candidates, and they both won their districts. So it felt to me like it would be an interesting place to go and sort of take the temperature of politics, combine it with a bit of reporting in Moscow, and sort of do a big piece.
And what was the taking of the temperature? So they won. Did they win because of Navalny poison and there was more sympathy? Did they win because they were slated to win anyway? What was the temperature, in fact, that you took? What is the view in Tomsk in regards
to? I think there's an enormous part that's simply apathy. So the turnout in those elections was 20%, a bit less than 20%. So, actually for them to win, you were talking about a matter of, a few hundred votes rather than a huge operation. I mean, I think that in itself is interesting. So, when you have the more important elections, like the presidential election or the referendum on the constitution, this administrative resource really comes into play where they really push to get the votes out. In this case, I think it was a bit of what's the word, complacency, and no one ever really votes in these elections. So if you just get, your sort of the sort of key budget workers to go and vote, then you'll get on with no problems. And the minute that you actually have somebody aggressively campaigning against you, also, even though his party's not registered, Navalny's got this smart voting thing. So they were telling people, even if it's a communist or it's a sort of fake opposition person, if you're in this district, this is who you should vote for if you want to send a message.
Basically, don't vote for United Russia, the party of power.
Exactly, yeah. Tactical voting against United Russia. So that seems to have really worked. And, as they said, their goal was not, if they went door knocking and people were like, oh God, I don't care about politics, why should I even vote? Which is what I think a lot of people say. They would just say, I'm not going to waste 20 minutes trying to persuade this person that their vote matters.
Just go away.
But I'm just going to go away and I'm going to find the person who is sort of quite opposition-y, but like maybe can't be bothered or thinks it's pointless or think United Russia are going to win, and just explain to them that actually, this is a matter of a few hundred votes and it could make a difference. And I think the most extraordinary, so there were these elections in a few parts of Russia, and I mean the most extraordinary of all, I think, was this place in Kaluga region where it seems that what happened, it's a sort of amalgamation of villages, and the local United Russia chief of this administration had wanted somebody to run against him so it didn't look ridiculous, and asked the cleaner in the administration building to run against him, and she got 62% of the vote, and she's now head of the administration. So for me, it was this sort of interesting.
And she actually wanted to refuse first.
She did,
said, well, I don't want to do it. I didn't plan to do it, but then she said the people wanted me, and so here I am. Yeah,
so I mean, there's this sort of, there's this extreme apathy, this thing that, I think sociologists call learned helplessness, where you feel, and then it's all about, if an alternative appears, that can suddenly seem quite attractive.
Which is exactly what kind of democratic argument against Putin is that when they say there's who else is not Putin, well, we don't know because you never allowed us to even.
They've just been Novichoks.
Right, exactly. Find out. But so to follow up on this, so Navalny's work was not in vain then, because in Tomsk he did get at least some political support.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, it's also it's a really interesting sort of political and philosophical question of like how you measure the support for someone in a system like this, right? So yeah, I think so the sort of Kremlin line and the kind of the Kremlin cheerleader line is that, you know, he's got 2%, you know, Western media keep blowing him up to be this huge threat to Putin and this is ridiculous. You know, element of that is true. On the other hand, and indeed, like, I mean, I think so there was this Levada poll that came out last week, looking at how over the last year his popularity has grown, and from, you know, the percentage of people who support his activities has gone up from 9% to 20%, which is, it's not insignificant. Yeah, at the same time, I think if people are given an open question of which politicians do you trust, like Navalny actually doesn't get a very high rating, and people are more likely to say a whole bunch of other systemic politicians. But at the same time, you know, it's hard to sort of project. First of all, there's an issue of like how honest people are going to be if you call them up and say, you know, do you support Navalny or not? Secondly, you know, in a situation of open political contest where there were debates or where Navalny was on TV every night, you know, I think there's a very different equation there. And you know, I mean, what was Svetlana Tikhanovskaya's rating in Belarus 3 months ago, and what is it now? Right. So I mean, you know, I think it may be that, you know, it may be that the sort of whoever the Tikhanovskaya figure in Russia, if there ever is one, will not be Navalny, and it will be someone that kind of comes out of nowhere, which is sort of how I ended this piece. But maybe it will be Navalny. Maybe it'll be no one.
Well, but another thing, I mean, is they call it non-systemic opposition, but is a non-systemic opposition, he's the only opposition. So essentially he is the opposition.
Right.
So he then becomes systemic as systemic as they come, because if there is a system and then there is an anti-system, that anti-system is part of the same system.
Yes, except that it's not part of the system in the way that it would be in another in countries where you have free access to media or this kind of thing.
I mean, but that's why one of the kind of concerns about his poisoning, and if he's non-systemic and out of the system, he has no protection, he has no consideration of privacy, he has no consideration of anything. So he is out of the system, and therefore all options are open to whoever wants to hunt him. So he's no protection. But at the same time, that's how systemic opposition or non-systemic works in Russia. So there's a system, and then everybody else that the system doesn't recognize. It's like a dissident formula. It's always dissident formula. So I guess that's how he is systemic within that particular. So he's a non-governmental, I guess, but he's still within the system of the Russian formula of politics. You're either within it, and even when you're outside it, but well-known and well-regarded, you become part of that system. Otherwise, then basically your argument that Putin poisoned him, there was some tacit agreement, that actually makes him systemic immediately, because the system wants to fight someone who is threatened.
Maybe.
Okay. Well,
but in terms of the systemic and not, I mean, one of the other things I thought was super interesting, which I wanted to look into in Tomsk, was one of, you know, so the response to, I don't know if it's a response, but I think maybe it will intensify now, but kind of the response to Navalny's growing popularity and the sort of increasingly stale feeling I feel around the systemic politics was the sort of what the Kremlin's response has always been, was to create these sort of new parties. So in the Tomsk elections, I think United Russia got about 24%, and then the second place was this party Novые Люди, New People, which, you know, is run by this businessman. Seems to have got an awful lot of money. There are billboards. People said that, you know, there were billboards everywhere before the election, sort of advertising these guys.
Like before, right? The Just Russia.
Yes, it's about something like that. Something like the sort of Prokhorov or Ksenia Sobchak presidential runs. Yeah. So you know, you have.
So they're sanctioned in a way.
Exactly. So they were given in the way that Navalny was never registered. Right. They are registered immediately. They say that they're against the system, but they don't criticize Putin. And of course, I mean, the other interesting thing, I mean, they use people who are real people who have real political ambitions. Who, you know, one of the women I met was. You know, had some was a woman who ran a series of gyms in Tomsk for pregnant women and mothers. And she had a lot of interesting ideas. She'd set up this business. She was very motivated. She said, I'm against Putin, but like I don't like Navalny because it's too aggressive. I think we should go through dialogue.
Male, right? And I'm a woman, and I'm supporting women.
But then even someone like her, so there was one of the best maternity clinic in Tomsk was about to be turned into a COVID hospital as part of the second wave, and she was protesting against this, and so she organized a protest. So the morning, so that was last Monday, and I went to see her on Thursday. And that morning, the what are they called, Rospotrebnadzor, so the sanitary body or whatever of the Russian state had been to her gyms and found a whole bunch of supposed violations. The classic scheme. Right. But so it's kind of interesting that even this fake opposition can. There's so little space for movement that they can go only so far. And I mean, I think for the Kremlin, that's fine, right? They want to, if these people get into trouble with the authorities and then, Putin can sweep in and help out. And, the idea is to have this idea of competition and then Putin's above it. But I do, there is also this sense of, well, you can try as hard as you like to create this fake stuff, but there's always the chance that, you get a Frankenstein monster that will actually turn out to be something different.
Right. But I do want to go back to what you said. So if Putin or tacit support or any support, there's some sort of go ahead with this. But at the same time, you say it is confusing and, why is it Novichok and why did they let go before Novichok got worn out or something like that. So what is then the Putin argument for poisoning Navalny with Novichok, letting him to go to Germany and having this giant scandal on his hands?
I mean, I don't want to sort of do the let's go into Putin's head thing. I think there was clearly.
But you did. I mean, you did in a book, so you can go for it.
Not really.
But you did explain. You did explain quite a bit.
I think there was always this question of Navalny's least favorite question, which I've asked him a few years ago, and apparently the night before this happened, he had a meeting with the volunteers in Tomsk, and one of them asked him the same question, which is, why are you not dead yet? So it wasn't like, oh my God, this has come out of nowhere. Like, who could have possibly thought? Over the years there have been and so apparently his answer the night before this happened was, oh God, this question again. I don't know, but my feeling is, I guess they wanted to, try to neutralize me with court cases and hassles and house arrest and all this stuff, rather than kill me and turn me into a martyr. But what's clear over the years is that there has been this back and forth of what the hell do we do with Navalny? And in 2013, it was sort of we let him run. Okay, God, he's got 27% in the Moscow mayor elections. Perhaps it's a bit dangerous. Do we put his brother in prison? Is that going to shut him up? That doesn't work. There was this.
Do we do the tax evasion and
and
the forest corruption? And
Kirov, the Kirov case,
yes, and then the perfume corruption.
Yeah. So with the Kirov case, I remember that they jailed him for a number of years, and then there was this huge protest in Moscow. And the next day, the only time I've ever seen this in a Russian court, the prosecutor came and said, "Actually, I'd like to reduce the sentence," and they let him out. So you could see in real time these sort of arguments inside the presidential administration of what to do with him. I think the people that I've spoken to who are sort of reasonably close to decision-making circles are 100% sure it's not Putin. There's no way this is. As you say, who this doesn't benefit Putin, why would they do it? Of course, I think that the circle of people who know what really happened is going to be tiny, but I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility to sort of look at Khabarovsk, to look at Belarus, to look at the fact that all of these different ways of quietening Navalny down haven't really worked, and to think, okay, actually, do we really want somebody here who's like a potential lightning rod for all these different discontents as we go into an economic crisis. I mean, you know, it's guesswork.
I think it is. I mean, I'm probably not going to surrender to this argument, but I certainly accept that as an argument, because we'll go to Belarus next, one of the arguments against Svetlana Tikhanovskaya was, oh my God, they don't have really an oppositional leader. She's not a real oppositional leader, but Navalny is an oppositional leader, systemic or non-systemic. You can look at it either way. And so there would be some sort of a threat, and Navalny dead in Tomsk or Omsk or wherever, not in Omsk actually, dead on the plane from Tomsk to Moscow, who is going to investigate? Novichok, non-Novichok. Germany is not going to come into Moscow and say, oh, let's see what happened to Navalny. So, well, he died, as you know, remember when Putin memorably said to everybody, right, exactly about Kursk submarine, well, it sank. So yes, and I think I would, that argument is an optional, certainly, but it does seem that he's certainly kind of losing his Midas touch in some ways. Do you think Putin will survive this? The Navalny non-poisoning and the European outrage and the sanctions that may be coming and the Nord Stream pipeline that may be canceled?
Oh, I mean, I'm sure he'll survive this. I do think that there is there is just this inherent unpredictability about a system like this that's sort of both stable but also quite brittle and fragile at the same time. You know, I wouldn't be hugely surprised if Putin was still in charge in much the same way in 15 years from now. And I wouldn't be hugely surprised if in a year from now, kind of some extraordinary thing happened. I feel like there's this huge sort of spectrum of kind of possible outcomes, and they're all very plausible.
No, that is so true. It's sort of the range of 11 time zones. You can either just flip one direction or another direction. Okay, so then let's get to Belarus, because you've been really writing wonderful things, and one of the kind of, when I looked at it, I thought it was so wonderful that your piece on protest in Belarus after the elections of August 9 then was turned into a political sign that the protesters were carrying, which was really kind of amazingly beautiful, probably very rewarding for a journalist to have something like that. I mean, you didn't draw it.
I didn't draw it.
But it was still attached to your piece. So you've covered the protests. I mean, it's kind of an almost non-question, is that your impression, are they going to continue? Because they seem to be still going strong. I mean, it was yesterday, what it was, over 100,000 people with the water cannons, and they just actually turned the water cannons against the police. But what do you think the solutions may be, conclusions may be? How Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, is she doing everything correctly to kind of assure that when Lukashenko is gone, the opposition has the upper hand? I mean, I don't know, it's a bit hypothetical, but sort of what are the, let's speculate, 2 months from now, what's the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think very tediously, a large part of it comes back to Vladimir Putin, right?
That's why we're talking about it, from Moscow, no less.
I mean, I think, it is interesting. When I was there, so I was there for the sort of 2 weeks after it had started.
So you were there in August, right?
So I was there
August 9.
Exactly, yeah. And certainly at that point, I mean, I've never really covered something where, the mood just went up and down so quickly, and so I got there on the Tuesday, so 2 days after the election, and my initial idea was that I was going to stay for 2 days. I was going to write a piece about the sort of awful repression, all these terrible violence, how the revolution was crushed and it was over, and then I was going to get out. And so I started reporting that piece, and then on the Wednesday morning, this first group of 250 women came out and were waiting for the police to arrest them, and they didn't. And then the next day, suddenly, this swelling more and more people until the Sunday when there was, this extraordinary rally where the police just sort of disappeared and all of Minsk was taken over. And then I think, and then the sort of the peak of that upwards emotion of the protest was actually the day after that, when Lukashenko flies by helicopter to this factory. He appears in front of this sort of specially selected audience, and they start booing him and shouting at him. And I remember being on the metro that afternoon and seeing everybody look at this footage on their phones.
But you weren't there. You weren't covering him.
I mean, so you couldn't get inside. That was he literally flew there by helicopter and went inside. But everybody, because of Telegram channels, because of the leaked footage, everybody saw it. So you think, I mean, this is a matter of hours or maximum days. I mean, 100,000 people in the streets yesterday. His own sort of core base is heckling him. He can't even travel around the city by car because he's too scared. This is it. So that was that, and then then went the other way, and that was like, oh, actually he's going to stay on, and oh, actually it looks like, having been on the fence for a bit, Russia is now supporting him and sending in people to help.
Putin was silent, dead silent. Everybody was projecting his behavior, but he was just not available.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, and so then then you're like, okay, well, maybe he's gonna come through as after all. Then the next weekend, this huge protest again. You're like, okay, actually this wasn't a sort of flash in the pan, Balotnaya, like a few big protests, and then there's some repression that dies down. These people are going to come out, and then we've sort of been in that holding pattern ever since, right? So it's nearly 2 months now, and Putin has. Well, they met. They met. It's very clear that the Kremlin doesn't want the street to win, but at the same time, he sort of supported Lukashenko in the most sort of half-hearted and dismissive way that you can support somebody, making it abundantly clear that he doesn't like him. There's been this, line of regional governors showing up in Minsk. I think there was Pskov, there was Vladivostok, there was Belgorod, I think. So, it's as if he's like that's his level. He's like a regional governor. But at the same time, the support is there.
Well, sort of a vague kind of, we're not going to let you be dismissed like that.
Yeah.
Kind of in this support. But also it seems that that was sort of going back to my Navalny argument, is that Putin is a KGB man, on своих не бросает. He doesn't give up his own, in a sense. So whoever, if it's not Putin, whoever tried to kill Navalny, because Navalny is his enemy, that person must be Putin's friend, in a sense. Mm-hmm. So he would be supporting him out of this strange, very kind of traditional idea of nationalism and patriotism, in a sense, that anything that is done for the benefit of the Kremlin is patriotic. And the same thing, it seems, with Belarus, with Lukashenko, is that, well, he's a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. I mean, we don't like him, but we have to support him, which kind of makes me think that, how is that? I also wanted to ask you, follow up on that. How is then that will play out? Because if Putin supports him just out of this idea that he has to, because they're both strong men and they're brothers or connected by some sort of autocratic oath, how long Lukashenko can last, or can he last anyway, because Putin will just make him into his own, beach boy, and decide that he's going to play volleyball for Putin from now on for the rest of his life.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think this is a case where actually, I think if there was another alternative, I don't think Putin would have a problem. If there was another alternative that he found acceptable, I don't think he'd have a problem with getting rid of Lukashenko. I don't necessarily think he thinks of him as like Svai. I mean, he obviously, as his own guy. Obviously, he doesn't want the protesters in. But I was asking someone who would certainly know, kind of, is it fair to say that they dislike each other? And they said no. I mean, that's a complete understatement. They absolutely hate each other, and they always have, kind of, Putin and Lukashenko. So I think Putin would be quite pleased to see the back of Lukashenko, but at the same time,
he just can't give him up this way.
He can't give him up this way. So I mean, if I was, again, I think I think there are, like with the future of Russia, I think there's this huge spectrum of possible outcomes. But if I was going to bet on one, it would be that, in the Kremlin, they're desperately looking at a scenario where they put pressure on Lukashenko to sort of, that he has to step down in
sign all the necessary agreements with Russia.
And perhaps there's another. I mean, it's a difficult balancing act to pull off, because I don't think just having some deputy that's part of the system is going to satisfy the street. I can't see it going on for 5 years, and I just don't see them trying to keep him in place.
But why can't, years. I mean, there was a Viktor Babariko, who was connected to Gazprom Bank apparently, and Lukashenko, as you remember, accused him of being the Russian hand, and that's why he jailed him. It was June, July, so he wouldn't be running in the election. Wouldn't it be just easier to kind of make him the president?
I think it would be easier too, and I think there was some fairly kind of convincing rumors before that they were looking at that, which I think is why he ended up in jail, because Lukashenko, for all that in some ways he's out of touch, he's a pretty canny operator. So, and I think it would perhaps have been a different equation, a sort of a clever Russia move to sort of push Lukashenko aside and back Babariko in the summer. Would be plausible. Now, when now if it's a case of basically getting rid of who they're calling the lawfully elected president, Lukashenko, letting some guy out of prison because there's 100,000 people on the streets and putting them in charge, that's something that feels a bit harder for kind of Kremlin to accept.
So you think that they should wait a little more if they are planning that it should not come?
I'm just saying, purely from the point of view of optics and what they see as sort of, acceptable in terms of what you allow and what you don't allow. I think backing a more or less pro-Russian candidate at an election is different to them there are like 200,000 people on the street demanding political change. We're going to bust this guy out of prison and put him up and kill Lukashenko or something.
That would have won very goodwill in Belarus. People would have thought, well, the brother Putin did something that we are looking for and asking for.
Yeah, and I think that's unfortunate. I think because as many people have said, I mean, it's not Ukraine. You don't have this geopolitical element. You don't have a split society. People do like Russia, but I mean, the one way to turn this sort of very pro-Russian country into an anti-Russian country is what they're doing now.
Well, exactly, but that's why, in a sense, I mean, with Navalny, with Belarus, it seems that they're not playing, the savvy Putin suddenly is not that savvy. He just seems to be very kind of straightforward in his KGB thinking, which he never, at least in our impression of him, never necessarily was that inflexible and kind of never was that straightforward and following exactly the formula is that, well, he's our son of a bitch, so we're going to support him, and busting Babariko out of prison would not look presidential for Putin. It would look like he was following the streets. But, the brotherly nation wants that, and Babariko is perfectly acceptable. So that would have seemed like it would have been a smarter move.
Yeah, but I don't think the Kremlin or anyone expected things to turn out like this, right?
No, I think many people did, actually. Many people did, because it did seem that, you basically, who do you support? If you talk about the brotherly nation that is not against the Russians, so you support the brotherly nation and not the bastard that actually for years were making Putin's own life miserable. Even 5 minutes before the election, made Putin's life miserable with the 33 Wagner. Right. So no, I think people did expect. You expect the uprising. Absolutely. Okay. People did expect that Putin would embrace the nation and.
But I'm saying people didn't expect there to be this kind of revolution in such a
No.
way.
I don't know. No,
right.
I mean, I was.
So I think it's difficult to plan for an event that people don't see coming.
Right? But what I'm saying is that it seems to me that Putin's decisions, in what I'm observing, they've been incredibly stale and not the decisions of a savvy operative that everybody says or used to say he is, and he's capable of, with one little wink to, I don't know, turn, as I said at the beginning, turn democracies down and whatnot. So it just seems to be basic, simple, and rather, as they say, the Russian Kandovy, sort of heavy-handed in many ways.
I mean, I think first of all, this thing you keep putting us up against, that I don't think you thought that, or I thought that he was able to do all these amazing things with one.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, on the other hand, I mean, I actually don't think. Yes, clearly in this case and in many other cases, he's been very inflexible, and Russia in general is not very good at doing sort of soft power with its neighbors, and they sort of get this thing wrong a lot. But I do think he's had a pretty difficult hand to play in this, and I don't know, if you're coming at it from the perspective of the Kremlin, I don't know where the sort of the clever moves were to have done things years ago, right? But reactively reacting to this kind of sudden burst of protest within the kind of tracks of the way Putin thinks and what their strategic goals are in Belarus. I think it's fascinating what is going to happen, because I'm not sure they have any great options. And it's sort of each, either supporting the streets, or trying to get Belarus out, or supporting Lukashenko, or trying to find some compromise figure in his entourage. I mean, these are all possible options, and there are like huge problems with all of them. And so. Well,
but I mean, yeah, I agree, because I live in the States, so there Putin is on one hand he's a total moron, on the other hand he's a Darth Vader and semi-operative. So kind of the truth is somewhere in the middle. But it does seem to be that this, and Russia, it's true. I mean, Raskolnikov is a national hero. So you basically kill people with an axe, not like you have this. But it seems just to be, even for Putin, seems a little bit too heavy-handed, even in a sense that, for example, why not meet with opposition? Why not take a phone call from the opposition, just at least hear them out and whatnot. But I guess you and I cannot really decide that and figure that out. So I wanted just to, last question about this. What do you think, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya? Because one of the things that the Russians are now complaining about after 2 weeks of kind of waiting it out, she's too Western and is too Western and deal with all these other people in the West and being pushed, and she's the Polish hand, or whatever, the American hand, or some sort of hand. So the Russians are getting more convinced that in fact she is that kind of hand. The more she's meeting with people in Lithuania, with people in European Union, with Macron, with whatnot. Do you think she's playing it well, or she has just no other option than going west because Russia is really not playing its part?
Yeah, I mean, I think, she's also had a difficult hand to play, right? I don't know when this will go out, but I spoke to her kind of 2 or 3 days ago, sort of in between her Macron and Merkel meetings, and was kind of asking these same questions, and also asking, have you had any kind of, informal contact from Russia? Have they sent sort of, representatives to speak to your representatives, and in the way that, often even with the most unfriendly forces, a businessman will go and talk to someone or whatever? Absolutely nothing, at least as far as she's saying. And she said, maybe it was a bit of a mistake that at the beginning we didn't actively push this. We said openly, we're ready to talk to anyone, and we want to talk to Russia, we want to talk to the European Union, and we want to talk to everyone, but we didn't sort of specially send a person to Moscow, because we
ask the permission from Moscow. Can we please have a revolution?
And now there's this sort of unfortunate situation where kind of Lukashenko's claim that this is all a geopolitical thing is becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think for her it's difficult to know what to do. I think for European leaders it's also quite difficult. I mean, do you, if you don't meet with her, you're sort of, you're not showing solidarity in any way with what's going on in Belarus. If you do meet with her, you're playing into this Kremlin narrative and sort of feeding the paranoia there, and boosting this idea that she's a sort of puppet. So I think it's tricky. It's also, I mean, again, going back to what we originally said of it sort of unfortunately being a lot down to the guy here, it's difficult to see how Macron or Merkel meeting with Tikhanovskaya and promising her what they can promise her that will actually affect the situation. Right. I mean, you can sanction his inner circle, but I mean that's a good symbolic thing to do, but is it going to make a difference? Probably not. You can give you can expedite visas and give support to people who are forced to leave, which is helpful and a good thing to do. But in terms of any actual effect on the outcome, she said, I'm going to go and ask Merkel to mediate between us and the government. I mean, how can Merkel do that?
But Lukashenko is not talking to them. Right. I mean, actually, that's what Svetlana Alexievich said. We need Putin's help because Lukashenko is the only person that Putin is the only person Lukashenko talks to.
Yeah.
So I guess Macron and Merkel can mediate with Putin rather than with Lukashenko in a way. But Putin doesn't want to mediate because the more she meets with the Westerners, the more Russians think it's against the Russians.
Yeah, no, it's all a mess. And I mean, what's really interesting is that there wasn't, in that period when the protests were swelling and he was being booed by his, there was this few days period where you would have thought that even in a system where, everybody is sort of sworn allegiance to the leader, these guys are not completely stupid. They can see what's happening, that there was never a situation where a group of people in the KGB or the army sort of got together and said, okay, actually, this guy is more of a liability for us now than a guarantor. We need to get rid of him. And that, there was that period where you thought that might happen.
But not in Belarus. I mean, in Belarus, and I even wrote a piece about this. In Belarus, there's very different system of loyalties and very different system of how power is organized, because it's really, there's not much oligarchy going on. There's not its own special forces, so they would be loyal to the government.
Well, so it's turned out, yeah. But
so it's turned out.
Yeah.
But I actually thought that for the Russians, that would be, I thought that Putin lost Belarus precisely because there was a moment when he could have shown his great KGB training and could play the way he sometimes used to be able to kind of play both sides and making it available. Okay, so one last question, maybe the one before last. I know you're not Nagorno-Karabakh expert, but I'm sure you've been there, right? Have you been?
I've been there in 2006, I think. So that's about the freshest information I have.
Peaceful. Yeah. Well, but there is, I mean, obviously almost an open war with Turkey being a major player. And I guess what I want to ask you, just to speculate, not that you're not going to go there covering it.
I think for now, probably not.
Probably not.
The sort of, I mean, it's certainly actually going to, from looking at friends who are there, going into Karabakh and reporting from the ground. I mean, the sort of potential to get killed against actual journalistic work you can do on the ground ratio seems like very, very out of balance. Yeah.
So what I wanted to ask you then, going back to Putin once again, is that, so Turkey is a major player and Putin is kind of on the sidelines trying to figure out how to make peace and signing petitions with Trump and Macron. Suddenly they're all friends about that. But also Russia actually has an agreement with Armenia that Russia should be defending Armenia if there is a crisis, which Russia is not doing, so basically breaking its own agreement. And so it does seem that Turkey, or Erdogan, who decided that he's going to be very important kind of global leader, why only give it to the Russians, the Americans, and the Chinese, is forcing the hand of everybody around it. Does Russia look horrible in this and weak and completely incapable of doing something, and particularly in a sense that Putin always says, don't meddle in my neighborhood because Ukraine is mine as a sphere of influence. And I don't mean it literally. Belarus is mine, and of course, all these former Soviet republics and now countries are also mine. And now it seems that he's not able to do anything. Does it show with Navalny, with Belarus, with Nagorno-Karabakh, that new Russia that you wrote about? Is it basically being deflated somehow, Putin's Russia? And now when he promoted his existence for another potentially 16 years, is it being deflated?
Whoa.
With Karabakh. With Karabakh, I mean, I don't know what you think, because I just look at it and it sounds fascinating, because he shows that he's totally toothless, and unless he's deciding what to do and hasn't decided yet.
Right. I mean, so as you said, it's certainly not my sphere of expertise. I mean, in terms of the treaty, right? I think because Karabakh is technically part of Azerbaijan, like under international law, you can say that that Armenia itself has not been attacked.
Well, but Armenia is at war, so shouldn't Russia be? Well, anyway, okay, technically.
Not, Armenia is at war over a piece of territory that's technically in someone else's land, right? So I think you can get out of it in that way. Clearly, in terms of sort of optics, it's not great. You've got as you say, sort of Turkey kind of openly jumping in Russia's backyard. I don't know.
Well, I guess I want to bring it back to your book, because when you basically saying, you make Russia great again, are we done with that?
No, because I think so. I was very, for me, I was not writing about, election meddling or Russia projecting itself in the world. It was very much about sort of creating a sense of identity among Russians, and I think that's definitely on the wane. I think this very patriotic moment after Crimea, where you sort of melded the Second World War victory with the Crimea annexation and sort of this sense of being part of a great power. I think that euphoria has worn off. I think the sort of basic nation building element of it, I think, has stayed and is maybe kind of separate to Putin. I mean, I think there is this, I think among large sections of the population, the idea of like Russia as a country to be proud of, and a history to be proud of, is sort of there in a way that perhaps it wasn't when
so that continues.
Yeah, perhaps. But in terms of the kind of day-to-day political concerns of people, what I think is maybe changing is, I think I think there's, finally after 20 years, there's an erosion of the idea that, life may be terrible and the local officials may be stealing and, the system may be corrupt, but like Putin is above that. And it's sort of his like wonderful trick for so long was that he was able to say that, he's part of the solution and not part of the system. And it's like, you've been there for 18 years, how can you still be part of the solution? Now, by this point, I think that is starting to change, and that's a really interesting dynamic to watch. But that feels a bit separate to me to,
all this geopolitical.
The sort of projection of Russia.
I guess the reason I wanted to ask you that and bring it to the book, although I understand that you were talking about the patriotic idea of what it is contemporary being a Russian, because if his actions are perceived as he's losing it, will that idea of nation with Putin stay on? Because he created this kind of new idea of nation, or Russia post-Soviet as a great Russia. But if he is no longer that strong, or doesn't appear as a winner all the time, how does Russian identity change, or it doesn't?
I mean, so I think for that case, it seems to me, and maybe maybe this is some kind of like Slavic chauvinism or something, but it seems to me that like the outcome of this Belarus situation is going to be way more important for that question than the outcome of Karabakh.
Right.
I think you're right. It does look, definitely, it's clear that Russia's not the only player in its own backyard, and that's a problem. But I think both in terms of domestic Russian audience and in terms of the world, it feels to me like, if Russia loses Belarus, like that is pretty extraordinary after what's happened in Ukraine. If there's a really unpleasant and messy war in Karabakh that doesn't directly involve Russia, but they also look a bit weak and don't have a ready solution to it. I mean, that's clearly a problem, but
so you would put it on the same level.
It doesn't feel like that to me. I don't know if that's just because I've spent lots of time in Belarus recently and no time in
No. I mean, it could be, but because remember when the Turks shot down the Russian plane, and there was this sort of the battle between the Sultan and the Emperor, and they were all kind of measuring who is bigger and better, and it seems to be a little bit of the same going on. But that was a very important battle for the Russians to watch, when Putin was saying to Erdogan, "You're going to be," I mean, he was not saying it in those words, but ultimately Erdogan surrendered and said, "We're, big brother Putin, we are the only ones." Remember, he was also saying on the world stage, "We are the senior statesmen," and all these other little people. So it does seem that now Erdogan is playing an upper hand, which shouldn't be for the nationalism or patriotism of Russia, shouldn't be a good thing, because if Xi Jinping of China is playing the upper hand, and Erdogan is playing the upper hand, and Belarus is going all to the west. So I just wonder how secure Putin's that image that he has, that he's above the fray, he's a national leader of all eternity, how that can stay. But as you said, I think at the beginning, and maybe we can conclude on that, you said very well, it can, you wouldn't be surprised if he stays on for another 15 years. You wouldn't be surprised that a year from now something happens and it's all gone. So you would stick by that statement, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think the joy of being a journalist is you normally get to ask questions rather than answer them. So I don't have to let on that I actually have no idea about any of these things, and I'm happy to just let kind of other people tell me what they think. So yeah, it feels to me like, I'm glad I don't have to make policy towards Russia, because I have no idea what the best policy is towards Russia, and I'm glad I don't have to make predictions about what's going to happen in Russia, because it feels very unpredictable to me.
Basically, you can describe and analyze sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.